Hello, kings and queens. You're listening to Affirmations of Excellence, an offering of personal devotions to fuel your week. I am your guide, Ellis, and I'm so excited to create a space of encouragement and inspiration for each of you. The person who lives a life of excellence is one who is willing to do and to dare. As living souls made in God's image, we are not called to mediocrity. We are called to excellence. Excellence is the result of a prosperous, well-lived, and fulfilled life. And this podcast is for those who sense a royal calling on your life, those who are learning to hear God's voice in clarity and need motivation for the assignment, and who want to live out His calling with excellence. Each week, we'll explore themes of everyday life and talk through ways to escape mediocrity and find true fulfillment. I'm tired. At this very moment, I am fragile and I am weary. I'm tired of praying. Yep, I said it. The other day I attempted to pray and the words just did not form. My mouth couldn't move. The thoughts just didn't connect. So I said nothing and hoped that God would search my weary heart and hear its silent plea. It's hard to pursue excellence when you're suffering from hate-filled racism fueled by anger and fear. It's hard to feel like royalty when you're treated like a wild animal, hunted as prey. It's hard to believe that you are a king or a queen when you're suffering due to the color of your skin, your contribution being devalued, your existence being scrutinized, your power being stripped, your hope being stolen, your intentions being persecuted, your intelligence being demeaned, your crisis being overlooked, and your very presence being hated. From one lifetime to the next, generation to generation, decade after decade. What should we say to Black people? What should we expect from white allies? What about other people of color? How can we rise from pain and despair to empowerment and excellence in the face of racism and injustice? Let's dive in. Kings and queens, be sure to rate, share, and subscribe as you listen today. And to support this podcast, visit my page on anchor.fm and click support. None of what you will hear on this episode is breaking news. I had planned on eventually doing an episode like this, but didn't imagine that it would be under the conditions that we're now experiencing in our world. The ideal of excellence is corroding before our very eyes. The blood of my ancestors is stained in the soil of America, and yet, when a Black man is innocent, he's seen as guilty, deserving of death. Or, when a Black woman is afraid, she's seen as a threat, worthy of being slain. My entire life has been about being Black. Sure, I'm a human, a creation, and a servant of God. And that is my ultimate identity. But I am Black and I'm proud. I used to hear that song, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, by James Brown when I was a kid, and I would get so excited. Well, because who can't hear James Brown's song and not feel just a little electric? It was released in 1968, the year Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was killed in my hometown of Memphis. My mother was a young child at the time, so I certainly was nowhere to be thought of back then. But something about that song always got me going. It's because it's so true. My family taught me a lot about race, racism, and injustice. While most kids were playing with toys and watching cartoons, I was listening to the old folks talk about Jim Crow days and our royal origins from Africa. I was watching documentaries on PBS about Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, and Marcus Garvey. I was idolizing women like Ida B. Wells, Madam C.J. Walker, Toni Morrison, and Angela Davis while reading books by Carter G. Woodson, W.E.B. Du Bois, James Baldwin, and Malcolm X. And I learned about the Freedom Riders and the white abolitionists and allies who stood for equality. I learned freedom songs and Negro spirituals and sang them with choirs and at concerts and recitals. I was taught so much about the struggle and suffering of my people, and I was so grateful that my generation would get to experience freedom and justice that was so diligently fought for. I always knew my Black was beautiful. My Black family, my Black church, my Black neighborhood, my Black friends, and my Black school proved that it was. My Blackness was never a liability. It was always an asset, at least until I became a professor. Several years ago, I shifted into the role of a professor at a predominantly white Christian university and loved it. But soon I noticed looks of disgust, stares of confusion, and start to feel the vibes of discomfort whenever I moved about campus. No better place on campus gave me these harsh responses than the classroom. Employees were implicit enough to cover their disapproval of me in this space, not unfortunately without many microaggressions like avoiding eye contact in the hallway, speaking to white colleagues in my presence without acknowledging me, inquiring whose secretary I was, or openly asking, "What is that dot on your forehead? Are you one of those people?" referencing a very prominent mole in the middle of my forehead that I was born with. More than that, it was my students who openly proclaimed, "She's rude. She's mean. She's so intimidating." All of the things that are stereotypically believed and said about Black people, and specifically Black women in the workplace. All the things that haunt us in ways the majority of this community will never have the displeasure of understanding. It was indeed painful. Among all the things said about me and to me, it was, "You don't belong here," that hurt the most. Me? The sweet, smart, confident, unassuming girl who grew up in the church? I don't belong here? A Christian college? No, it didn't matter that I was a sweet, smart, unassuming, confident churchgoer, not to mention pretty amazing in the classroom, and had kicked butt as an entrepreneur, which gave me loads of real-world wisdom to offer to my students. My excellence did not matter. All that mattered is that I was not a white, gray-haired man, the expected image of a well-respected beholder of knowledge in educational environments. That was enough for me not to belong. So with this major life decision I made to take a break from my thriving PR business and shift to a new career, I am forced to face with the reality that I don't belong. This shattered me and made pulling up to the parking lot each day to teach the most stressful, rageful, fearful, terrifying, anxiety-induced feeling of my life. It made me face some real things about race, gender, and age in our culture, but mainly race. It made me see that even though we, Black and white, can have the same God and the same Bible, we do not have the same love, respect, and kinship when it comes to race. This pushed me into prayer, deep, intense prayer with a practice of meditation and fasting. It pushed me in making sure I was the best professor I could be, no matter what the student evaluation said. It pushed me into looking closely at the curriculum in my classes to ensure that each one had an intercultural lens. It pushed me into spending more interpersonal time connecting with my students and colleagues, but especially my students, to affirm for them that I desire and frankly I deserve the same grace as they do. It pushed me into unapologetically honoring my Blackness, no matter how others saw me or perceived me. Because after all, I am God's child, just like the rest of them, whether they wanted to believe it or not, or choose to treat me as such. I learned that the harsh realities of being in an environment that believes to be Jesus to the community cannot fully and actually do so until it learns to love from within. All in all, I have been tested, I have evolved, I have grown, I've served, I've given, and I've affirmed and been affirmed as a result. And even in this environment, tremendous blessings have been bestowed as a result. Lives have been changed as a result. Hope in God has been restored as a result. And excellence has been displayed as a result. Kings and queens, race-based stress and trauma are real. It's so much more real now than ever due to the 24/7 news cycle and constant exposure to social media, where headlines are not just announced, but they're shared and reshared and commented on and discussed and hashtagged millions of times. When at some point you could hear a disturbing headline on your car radio or see it on the evening news, you've now been exposed to it on multiple platforms with multiple points of view. And sadly, the headline is no longer just a story being reported. It's the actual footage of an individual's life being snatched and their last breath being taken, which is fully public for the whole world to watch. And we've gotten in the habit of sharing so much that we leave no sense of dignity or integrity for the individual, because since the news media broadcasts these grueling images of their murder, we feel it's justification to do the same, and in doing so, we re-traumatize each other over and over again. We need to remember that we don't get to shake off this collective race-based trauma when we come to work, when we come to worship, when we go out for a jog, or to birdwatch in the park, when we move about our daily tasks in the world. Add to that idea the Amy Coopers of the world, the people who don't carry an actual gun or an official badge, but they carry the gun of bias and a lifelong badge of white privilege, which lends them more power than they know what to do with or deserve. If I say that racism and injustice is sin, would you agree? Would you agree that both constructs get us closer to evil and further away from good? Consider the wrongdoing in your life, no matter how small or big you think it may be. Perhaps there's gluttony, doubt, pornography, lying, pride, or other sins that are looming in the corridors of your heart that you are not proud of. Every single sin, shortcoming, or breakdown of the human condition can be surrendered to God so that we can live in complete freedom. If we allow it, that freedom will bring us rich blessings to our hearts, our minds, our spirits, and our souls. But racism and injustice aren't going to magically go away. They are too embedded in society and present a spiritual warfare that battles against us and misplaces even the most sincerest of efforts. What would it take for us to live differently? To hold each other accountable, to see color and consider it cultural capital, so to speak, to swap pain for progress and hate for harmony. Take a second to think about it. Kings and queens, I don't have the answers. I really don't. I just know it hurts. It hurts badly. But I won't be backing down anytime soon, and I hope you won't either. Here are some things I think we can do in the face of racism and injustice. To my white brothers and sisters, is the privilege and power you gain from the label of whiteness more important than the grace and truth you owe your brothers and sisters in your obligation as a believer in God? Which role or label is more valuable to you? Take a real assessment of the ways you idly perpetuate systems of racism and injustice. Your choice to prefer whiteness over godliness is a sign. It's a sign that the poison of hate is limiting your excellence. It's a sign that your silence is advocating violence. It's a sign that your God belongs exclusively to you and not to people of color, and certainly not to those who identify as Black in your eyes. Just as a CEO is responsible to ensure that diversity, equity, inclusion practices are cemented into the culture of their organization, you too have a responsibility to confront sin and systems of injustice that perpetuate suffering of people who have been marginalized for generations. Racism isn't just open and covert hate. It is subtle and strategic. Even if you believe you love Black people, the hate can find its way to you. It shows up in your hiring decisions, your choice of neighborhood, your selections when voting, your blind approach to social issues, your group of friends, your jokes, your slight comments, your body language, your eye contact. You may not be born racist, but you were born into a hateful system that your ancestors built, and only you are left to repair the damage. Ask yourself, how many of your white pastors, preachers, teachers, ministry leaders, and the like are allowing their biases and privileges, and ultimately their fears, to lead them in their decisions about Black people and lead them to not communicating openly about repenting of racism and prejudice to their congregations? How many white politicians, corporate leaders, business owners, philanthropists, and even your own family members and neighbors are calling out injustice? Like actually speaking up, then walking the talk in their daily lives. Because that's what happens when bias and privilege goes unchecked. It converts to a warped sense of power to harm, disregard, kill, or destroy anyone who does not look like you. And fear, when it goes unaddressed, turns into anger. People's fears make them angry at those they deem responsible for making them afraid. And if fear is the root, love is the solution, because perfect love casts out all fear. Whether you identify as Christian or not, know that spirituality is not neutral. You either serve God or you serve the enemy. If you serve God, you love what is good. If you serve the enemy, you love what is evil. Racism bears a similar construct, absent of power. You either love Black people or you hate Black people. And just like you find a way to show your love, you will also eventually find a way to show your hate. So say to your Black friends and colleagues, "Are you okay?" Or, "I'm so sorry." Or, "I'm outraged at what's happening to Black people, and I am here for you, no matter what." Sometimes saying that is all that's needed. Just be human. To white brothers and sisters who are acknowledging the pain, expressing empathy, and working towards solutions, I thank you. Keep showing up, despising injustice, and respecting this fight. But also know that the Black people you advocate for need to set the tone. You have to let us say what hurts and how we should go about healing. You cannot tell us how to grieve or strategize or protest. Don't overbear or push your agenda or expect us to teach you about our struggle. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because if you cling to the safety in your privilege, you are only hurting us more. Be there, be an ally, and don't waver. If you're white and you're practicing a religious faith and not standing for injustice, your hypocrisy is an accomplice to the crime of hate. The time is up for a virgin of religion that refuses to challenge oppressive policies and practices that affect the very people who sit in your pews every Sunday morning. White people of faith must start acting more godlike than white. The power of whiteness blinds minds and hearts and must be repented of. And true repentance means offering more than just apologies and statements. It means there's a changing of hearts and minds. Are you willing to speak out against injustice? Are you offering support and care directly to the Black people you know? Are you thinking of ways you can educate yourself about racism, power, and oppression? Are you open to leveraging your reputation, privilege, and comfort to be an actual ally? If so, white people, here's your shot, and the time is as good as any. To all of the beautiful people of color who do not identify as Black, you may relate to this struggle. If you're in America, you've most likely experienced and seen some kind of injustice as you've been labeled, stereotyped, and targeted, all wrongfully so. Your people have been considered a minority, and I don't favor that word, thus being treated as much. I'm not crazy about the term people of color either. Well, because white is practically a color too. And I know that many of you don't like to be classified in that way. I get it. But if you care about what's happening, and I hope you do, express your dismay over the rampant injustices. Make space for the Black people and the people of your ethnicity to breathe and commune together, and to share the fullness of their humanity with you. And do the intentional work required to make any of the spaces, places, systems, and processes you are attached to truly equitable and inclusive for all. This powerfully communicates in word and in deed that their value to you is not in their race, but in their humanity. There's a documentary about MLK called King in the Wilderness, and it documents his last attempts at approving civil rights between the years of the March on Washington and the days preceding his death. He spent some time living, organizing, and marching in Chicago. And when you watch the documentary, you'll see the hate in the eyes of his white opposers and how it has a similar sting to the hate in the eyes of the police officer who held George Floyd down to his death. And the 3 officers who stood by and watched could figuratively be you if you choose to be silent. Know that this systematic hate is cyclical and understand that there will be persecution if you fight, but you must stick to the law of truth, no matter what the public mood is regarding it or people who stand for it. Learn what you need to learn about the oppression of Black people in America. Books, documentaries, articles, conversations, and fill in the gaps if you're already in the know, because there is a lot to unpack. You will find that bad ideologies make us rehearse bad habits. So if we hold on to the wrong ideas and practice them perpetually as a norm, then there's no one willing to speak up and call out the wrong. Poet Audre Lorde once said, "There is no single issue struggle because we don't live single issue lives." This means a Black issue is your issue. It's a human issue. The social and economic outcomes of every race are intertwined. These deaths we've seen don't simply represent a failure of policing. They show a failure of justice, a failure in business, a failure in education, a failure in civic engagement, a failure in economic policy, a failure in wealth and home ownership, a failure to value Black lives and the lives of people who look like you. In order to protect and serve Black communities in addition to communities of color, we must dismantle the structural racism that is literally choking out our people, choking out the economic growth and democracy itself. For Black value to be realized, Black lives just can't matter in their own families, groups, and neighborhoods. They must matter everywhere. And you, person of color, have more power than you know. And I pray that you'll use it. And to my precious kings and queens of African descent, my brothers and sisters, I cry with you. I know it's hard, but we can be excellent in this season. Our excellence is second nature. Think of all our ancestors endured. Their spirit lives in you, and we can overcome this, but we must do it together. When we are under attack, we've got to hang on to the truth. This will not be easy, especially when all hell is breaking loose around you. We can be angry and still be righteous. We can pray and still fight back. We can organize and still practice self-care. We can hurt and still heal. As I said before, I honestly don't have the answers for us, but I know what we've been through. And I know that in our community, we have customs and codes. And I know that there are conversations and collectives that we need to have and have had together, just us. But I'll share what I think I can in a public form of media. First, I want to encourage you to think about pausing on spending money with big brands and put more of your financial resources into small Black-owned businesses and entrepreneurs. Save it, invest it, but pause on spending it. Not that brands don't care about social justice, but money talks. And if Black people are the highest spending demographic in the U.S., that means that we have economic power to make things happen. In order to maintain decent corporate structure, brands and organizations have to start acknowledging how racism and injustice hurts us. So far, Nike, Target, and others are speaking out clearly. So let's monitor their commitments and make sure they know the weight of the psychological stressors put on their employees and customers, mainly those who are Black, when injustices occur. The Montgomery bus boycott lasted for an entire year. Resistance won't have overnight results, but it will send an immediate signal. Not only should you be voting with your voices, you should be voting with your coins. As you spend your money, hold brands and even your employer accountable for their actions. When their board representation is absent of a Black face, when they advertise and market their products with stereotypical images, when they neglect the talent of Black minds by hindering their climb up the corporate ladder, when they delay action or communication on issues of injustice, or just choose to stay quiet altogether. No business can be excellent without Black influence and the Black dollar. I also want to remind you that you don't have to watch the murder videos. You don't have to share the images of dying and lifeless bodies. These are brutal and can damage your mental health. The trauma we experience is real, and we don't have to self-select to experience more of it. The daily terror of hoping that you or your loved ones stay safe and unharmed is enough to bear. Know that you can opt out and that you don't have to share, like, or comment on these things. But you can use the platforms you subscribe to donate to worthy organizations and causes that support the Black community, and to spread any positive information you find, or to even just express your thoughts and reflections about what you feel at the moment as a way to vent or release. You can remain informed, but know that social media and news media has a way of desensitizing our minds to accept hate and crime as a way of life, and to drive up the anxiety that we already feel from other areas of society and daily life. You do not want to commiserate in every disaster more and more, letting the news media and social media tell you how to feel or reinforce the belief that we do not value our own lives, thus others won't. We do underestimate our excellence at times and lack a value of self. But that's because we've been told and shown time after time that we don't matter. You can unlike, unsubscribe, unfollow anything that portrays us at odds or speaks to the contrary. Instead, you can amplify Black voices and the voices of our allies. Amplify Black content so that everything connected to our voices is being authentically spread. This sends a message that we will not stand by and watch our people die and deteriorate. Lastly, as we comfort one another and gather as a community, I know that we will flock to our belief in God and our practices of prayer, praise, and worship. And there's one thing that comes to mind when I process that thought, and it's the word accountability. I know that everyone is hurting and that each of us feel a sense of obligation. But I want you to know that this is war. It's a kind of spiritual warfare on your mind, on your body, your family, your spirit, and your future. And I know you will stay committed for the long haul. But I want to ask you to keep your faith leaders and politicians accountable. Keep your white friends and colleagues and neighbors accountable. They have influence and they need to use it. You shouldn't have to carry the emotional labor of educating people how to treat you like a respectable human being. I addressed this earlier on, and if you need to share this episode with a white person, please do so. We can tweet, we can get mad, we can post on Facebook, we can pray, but we cannot let these tragedies continue and keep living life as if we're powerless against them. We have power, and right now our power is in calling out wrong, reinforcing what's right, caring for one another fiercely, and finding every opportunity possible to hold those with privilege and platforms accountable to do their own work in cleaning up the mess they've contributed to. Your power is not in you alone. It's connected to the source that has always and in every way loved you, chosen you, and redeemed you. Give yourself something each day. Whatever it is, remind yourself, my brother, that you are a king. Look in the mirror, my sister, and greet yourself as a queen. You are royalty indeed. I haven't endured the pain of losing a loved one to a racial injustice. But when I see the faces of Trayvon Martin, Philando Castile, and George Floyd, and others, I see my father, my brothers, my uncles, my future husband, my friends, my cousins, and every Black man I love and care for. When I hear the names Sandra Bland, Tatiana Jefferson, and Breonna Taylor, I hear the name of my mother, my aunts, my friends, my sorority sisters, my mentees. I hear my name. Because if this hate continues to spread, the reality of the possibility that they could one day be a hashtag will continue. I pray to God for His protection and divine covering for us all. I believe He will carry us, just like He carried our ancestors, those who smiled on days when they didn't feel like it, or couldn't form the words to say how they felt. So the rest is still to be told. And hopefully, we'll cut racism out at the root. God has been so unbelievably merciful in His care, His revelation, and His provision. And I hope that in the face of hate, we will learn to lean and live in spaces where the hope for His grace remains. Now that we've pondered over what excellence means in the fight against racism and injustice, let's pursue these affirmations for the week. Say this with me. I am exactly who God says I am. Hate has no place in my heart. I am worthy of love, peace, and freedom. When I am hurt, I will speak up. When others are hurt, I will speak up for them. God, please remind me this day and in the days to come that I am royalty. Kings and queens, may you be fully equipped to master excellence in the world this week. Go be excellent, and don't forget your crowns.